The scream that tore through the canyon wasn't human, and that was what made Cruz's blood run cold as she pressed the three children deeper into the cave behind her. She had been 22 years old for exactly 3 weeks when the Comanche war party had descended on the wagon train, and in the chaos of gunfire and flames, she had grabbed the nearest children and run into the rocky wilderness of the Arizona Territory. That had been 2 days ago, in the summer of 1878, and now something else was hunting in these mountains. The youngest child, 4-year-old Emma, whimpered against Catherine's skirts, and she placed a gentle hand over the girl's mouth, her own heart hammering so hard she thought it might burst through her ribs. The other 2 children, 7-year-old Thomas and 9-year-old Sarah, huddled close, their faces streaked with dust and tears. Catherine had found them wandering in the aftermath of the attack, their parents among the dead scattered across the desert floor. She had no idea if her own family had survived. She had been traveling with her aunt and uncle to start a new life in California, but that dream felt like it belonged to another woman now, someone who had never known true terror. The growl came again, closer this time, and Catherine recognized it for what it was, a mountain lion, probably drawn by the scent of the dried beef she had salvaged from the wreckage. Her hands trembled as she reached for the heavy stick she had been using as a weapon, knowing full well it would do nothing against a predator of that size. She had no gun, no knife, nothing but her own body to place between these children and death. "Stay behind me," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "No matter what happens, you stay behind me." Sarah's thin fingers clutched at Catherine's torn dress. "I'm scared." "I know, sweetheart. I know." The shadow appeared at the mouth of the cave first, blocking out the afternoon sun, and Catherine's breath caught in her throat. But it wasn't the sleek form of a mountain lion that filled the entrance. It was a man, and he was the biggest human being Catherine had ever seen in her life. He had to duck to fit through the opening, his shoulders so broad they nearly touched both sides of the narrow entrance. Dark hair hung past his collar, tangled and wild, and a thick beard covered the lower half of his face. But it was his eyes that held Catherine frozen in place, pale blue, sharp as glass, and currently fixed on the children behind her with an expression she couldn't quite read. "Please," Catherine heard herself say, raising the stick with shaking hands, "please don't hurt them." The man's gaze shifted to her, and one dark eyebrow rose slightly. He was dressed in buckskin and worn leather, with a rifle slung across his back and a knife at his belt that looked like it could gut a buffalo. Muscles corded his arms and chest, visible beneath the open neck of his shirt, and everything about him spoke of raw power and danger. "Put that down before you hurt yourself," he said, his voice a low rumble that echoed off the cave walls. "I am not here to harm you." "How do I know that?" Catherine kept the stick raised, even though her arms were already aching. "How do I know you are not with the raiders?" "If I was with the raiders, you would already be dead." He said it matter-of-factly, without malice, and somehow that made it more frightening. "I saw the smoke from the wagon train 2 days ago. Been tracking survivors since." "There are others?" Hope flared in Catherine's chest. The man shook his head slowly. "Not that I have found. You 4 are the first living souls I have come across." He paused, then added, "There is a cat circling this area. Big male, hungry. You cannot stay here." "We cannot go anywhere," Catherine said, hating how her voice cracked. "The children are exhausted. We have barely any food or water left. I do not even know where we are." "You're about 15 miles northeast of Vulture City, in the Vulture Mountains." He moved slightly, and Catherine flinched, but he was only unslingling his canteen. He held it out toward her. "Drink. All of you." Catherine hesitated, searching his face for any sign of deception. But there was something steady in those pale eyes, something that made her slowly lower her stick and reach for the canteen. The water was cool and clean, the most beautiful thing she had tasted in days. She rationed small sips to each child before allowing herself another swallow. "Thank you," she managed. He nodded once. "My name is Kane Thompson. I have a cabin about 3 miles west of here, up in the higher elevations. You will come with me." It was not a question, and Catherine felt her spine straighten despite her exhaustion. "We are not going anywhere with a strange man. We will make our way to Vulture City on our own." Kane Thompson's expression did not change, but she thought she saw something that might have been amusement flicker in his eyes. "You will not make it half a mile before that cat finds you, or the heat kills you, or you stumble into another Comanche hunting party. He crossed his arms over his massive chest. I am offering you safety, food, shelter. You would be a fool to refuse. Mama Catherine, Thomas whispered, tugging at her sleeve. The boy had started calling her that yesterday, and it made her heart ache. I'm so hungry. The simple plea broke something in Catherine's resolve. She looked at the three small faces turned up toward her, trusting her to keep them safe, to make the right choice. Then she looked back at Kane Thompson, this mountain of a man who could snap her neck with one hand, but who had offered them water instead. If you try to hurt us, she said quietly, I will fight you with everything I have. Noted. He turned toward the cave entrance. Stay close. The cat is out there. Catherine gathered the children around her, and they followed Kane out into the fading sunlight. The Arizona wilderness stretched before them in every direction, all red rock and scrub brush and endless sky. The heat hit her like a physical force after the relative coolness of the cave, but Kane set off at a steady pace that was slow enough for the children to follow. He led them through narrow passages between boulders, along a ridge that made Catherine's stomach lurch when she looked down, and finally up a steep incline that had Emma crying with exhaustion. Without a word, Kane scooped the little girl up onto his shoulders, settling her there as easily as if she weighed nothing. Emma's tears stopped immediately, and she clung to his head with wide eyes. You are safe, little one, Kane said, his rough voice somehow gentle. Hold on tight. They walked for what felt like hours, but was probably less than one. Catherine's feet screamed in her ruined boots, and her dress was torn in a dozen places from catching on rocks and thorns, but she kept moving, one hand on Sarah's shoulder and the other holding Thomas's hand, following the broad back of the stranger who had promised them shelter. The cabin appeared suddenly, nestled against a cliff face and surrounded by pine trees. It was larger than Catherine had expected, built from logs and stone, with a covered porch and shuttered windows. A small barn stood nearby, and she could hear the soft sounds of livestock. Home, Kane said simply, lowering Emma to the ground. Such as it is. He opened the door and gestured for them to enter. Catherine hesitated on the threshold, some deep instinct warning her that once she stepped inside, everything would change. But Thomas was already stumbling forward, and Sarah was pulling at her hand, and Emma was following Kane with complete trust. So Catherine took a breath and stepped into Kane Thompson's home. The interior was surprisingly neat, with a stone fireplace dominating one wall and a long table with benches in the center of the room. Shelves lined the walls, stocked with supplies and provisions. A ladder led up to a loft area, and Catherine could see a large bed tucked into one corner. Everything was rough-hewn and masculine, but clean and well-maintained. Sit, Kane said, pulling out the benches. I will get food. The children collapsed onto the benches gratefully, and Catherine sank down beside them, feeling the full weight of the past 2 days settling over her like a heavy blanket. She watched as Kane moved around the cabin with practiced efficiency, stoking the fire, pulling out bread and cheese and dried meat, filling a pitcher with water from a covered barrel. He set the food in front of them without ceremony. Eat slowly. You will make yourselves sick otherwise. Catherine tried to heed his warning, but the moment the bread touched her tongue, her body took over. She ate mechanically, barely tasting the food, just needing to fill the hollow ache inside her. The children did the same, and Kane watched them with those pale, unreadable eyes. When they had finished, he cleared the dishes and then crossed to a large chest in the corner. He pulled out blankets and what looked like old shirts. You can wash at the pump outside. These will do for sleeping clothes. The loft has room enough for all of you. Where will you sleep? Catherine asked, finding her voice. I will take the floor. He met her gaze steadily. You have my word that you are safe here, all of you. Catherine wanted to believe him. Everything about this situation screamed danger. Strange man, isolated cabin, no witnesses for miles. But the children were already drooping with exhaustion, and she was not sure she could take another step. And there was something in Kane Thompson's eyes, some core of honor that she recognized even through her fear. Thank you, she said quietly, for everything. He nodded once, then turned away to tend to the fire. Catherine gathered the children and the borrowed clothing and led them outside to the pump. The water was cold and clean, and she washed their faces and hands as best she could, murmuring soothing words as they cried from exhaustion and grief. When they returned inside, Kane had set up the loft with blankets and pillows, creating a cozy nest for them. Catherine helped the children change into the oversized shirts, which hung on them like nightgowns, and then tucked them into the blankets. They were asleep almost instantly, their small bodies finally surrendering to rest. Catherine climbed back down the ladder to find Kane sitting by the fire, cleaning his rifle. She should have gone straight to bed, but something made her sit on the bench instead, just watching him work. "Why did you help us?" she asked after a long silence. Kane did not look up from his work. "Because you needed help." "That is all?" "That is all." He ran an oiled cloth along the barrel. "I have lived in these mountains for 5 years. I know what it takes to survive out here. You would not have lasted another day." "We might have managed." Now he did look at her, and the intensity of his gaze made her breath catch. "You are brave, I will give you that. Foolish, but brave. Standing between those children and a mountain lion with nothing but a stick." He shook his head. "But bravery only gets you so far." Catherine felt her cheeks flush. "What else was I supposed to do? Let them die?" "No." His voice softened slightly. "You did the right thing. You kept them alive long enough for help to find you." "Help being you?" "Help being me." They sat in silence for a while longer, the crackling of the fire the only sound. Catherine found herself studying him in the flickering light, the strong line of his jaw beneath the beard, the way his hands moved with surprising delicacy over the rifle, the sheer size and power of him. He should have frightened her, and part of her was frightened, but another part, a part she did not quite understand, felt safer than she had in days. "What were you doing out here alone?" she asked. "You said you have lived here for 5 years. That's a long time without company." "I like the solitude." He set the rifle aside and started on his knife. "Came out here after the war. Could not stomach being around people anymore." "The war?" Catherine did the math in her head. "You fought in the Civil War?" "Did my part." His jaw tightened. "Saw enough blood and death to last a lifetime. Figured the mountains would be quieter." "And have they been?" "Until now." But there was no rancor in his voice, just a statement of fact. Catherine pulled her knees up to her chest, wrapping her arms around them. "I do not know what I am going to do. I have 3 children who are not mine. No money, no family that I know of. I do not even know if my aunt and uncle survived." "We will send word to Vulture City tomorrow," Kane said. "See if there are any other survivors. See if these children have any family to claim them. And if they do not," he looked at her for a long moment, "then we will figure something out." The way he said we made something flutter in Catherine's chest. "You do not even know us. Why would you help us beyond tonight?" Kane was quiet for so long she thought he would not answer. Then he said, "I have spent 5 years trying to forget that I am part of the human race, trying to pretend that I do not need anyone, that I am better off alone. But watching you in that cave, ready to die to protect those children, I remembered something I thought I had lost." He paused. "I remembered what it feels like to care about something other than myself." Catherine felt tears prickling at her eyes. "I'm terrified," she admitted in a whisper. "I have no idea what I am doing. I just knew I could not leave them." "That makes you a better person than most." Kane stood and moved to the chest again, pulling out more blankets. "Get some sleep. Things will be clearer in the morning." Catherine wanted to say more, to ask more questions, to understand this complicated man who had appeared out of nowhere to save them. But exhaustion was pulling at her like a tide, and she found herself climbing the ladder back to the loft almost in a daze. She curled up between Sarah and Emma, with Thomas on Sarah's other side, and pulled the blanket over all of them. Below, she could hear Kane settling himself on the floor by the fire. And for the first time in 2 days, Catherine Cruz closed her eyes and slept without fear. She woke to the smell of coffee and bacon, and for a confused moment, she thought she was back in her uncle's house in Missouri. Then, memory returned in a rush, and she sat up, looking around wildly. The children were still asleep beside her, their faces peaceful for the first time since the attack. Catherine climbed down the ladder to find Kane at the stove, cooking breakfast with the same calm efficiency he did everything else. He glanced over his shoulder at her approach. "Morning. Coffee is ready." "Thank you." Catherine poured herself a cup from the pot on the table, savoring the bitter warmth. You did not have to do all this. You need to eat. So do the children. He flipped the bacon with a long fork. There's a basin of water warming by the fire if you want to wash properly. I have some spare clothes that might fit you. They will be too large, but better than that torn dress. Catherine looked down at herself and felt heat rush to her face. She had not realized quite how much of her undergarments were visible through the rips in her dress. That would be kind of you. Kane pointed to a neat stack of clothing on one of the shelves. Help yourself. I will watch the food. Catherine took the clothes and moved to the basin, acutely aware of Kane's presence even though he had turned his back to give her privacy. She washed quickly, amazed at how much dust and blood came off her skin, then pulled on the spare clothes. The shirt hung nearly to her knees and she had to roll the sleeves up multiple times. The trousers required a belt cinched tight, and even then they were comically large, but they were clean and whole, and that was all that mattered. When she turned back, Kane was dishing up plates of bacon and eggs. He paused when he saw her, something unreadable crossing his face. What? Catherine asked, suddenly self-conscious. Nothing. It is just strange seeing someone else in my clothes. He set the plates on the table. Strange, but not bad. Before Catherine could respond, Emma appeared at the top of the ladder, rubbing her eyes. I smell food. Come down, sweetheart, Catherine called. Breakfast is ready. The children joined them quickly, and soon they were all seated around the table, eating Kane's simple but delicious food. Thomas kept sneaking glances at Kane with a mixture of awe and wariness, while Sarah seemed more curious than afraid. Emma, in the way of very young children, had apparently decided Kane was safe and kept smiling at him. What happens now? Sarah asked, pushing eggs around her plate. Kane and Catherine exchanged glances. I'm going to ride into Vulture City today, Kane said. I need to let the authorities know about the attack and see if there are any other survivors. I also need to find out if you three have any family who might be looking for you. Mama and Papa are dead, Thomas said, his voice flat. I saw them. Catherine reached across the table and squeezed his hand. I know, sweetheart, but maybe you have aunts or uncles, grandparents, someone who will want to care for you. What if we do not? Sarah asked, her eyes wide and scared. Then we will figure something else out, Catherine said firmly, echoing Kane's words from the night before. After breakfast, Kane prepared to leave. He saddled a large bay horse from the small barn, checking his rifle and supplies with methodical care. Catherine walked outside with him, wrapping her arms around herself despite the warmth of the morning. How long will you be gone? She asked. Most of the day. It is a 3-hour ride each way, and I do not know how long the business in town will take. He swung up into the saddle with easy grace. There is food in the cabin and fresh water from the pump. Keep the doors and windows locked. Do not leave the immediate area. There are still dangers out here. We will be fine, Catherine said, trying to sound more confident than she felt. Kane looked down at her, his pale eyes serious. I am trusting you to keep yourself and those children safe until I return. And I'm trusting you to come back. Something shifted in his expression, a softening around his eyes. I will come back. You have my word. He rode off down the mountain trail, and Catherine watched until he disappeared from sight. Then she turned back to the cabin, where 3 orphaned children waited for her to somehow make everything right. The day passed slowly. Catherine kept the children occupied with simple tasks, helping her tidy the cabin and organize Kane's supplies. She found books on his shelves, surprising in their variety, everything from agricultural manuals to poetry, and she read to the children until her voice grew hoarse. In the afternoon, she took them outside to play in the shade near the cabin, always keeping one eye on the surrounding wilderness. The children were remarkably resilient, she thought, watching them chase each other around the trees. They laughed and shouted like normal children, even though they had witnessed horrors no child should see. As the sun began to sink toward the horizon, Catherine's anxiety grew. Kane had said he would be gone most of the day, but what if something had happened to him? What if he did not come back? She and the children would be stranded up here, with limited supplies and no idea how to find their way to civilization. But just as she was beginning to truly worry, she heard the sound of hoofbeats on the trail. Kane appeared through the trees, still astride the bay horse, and relief flooded through Catherine so intensely it made her dizzy. He dismounted and led the horse to the barn, then walked over to where Catherine stood on the porch. His face was grim. "What did you learn?" she asked quietly. "The news is not good. There were 32 people on that wagon train. I found evidence of 16 dead at the attack site. The Comanche took some captives, mostly young women. That leaves a handful unaccounted for, but the sheriff does not hold out much hope." He paused. "I described you 4 to everyone in town. No one came forward to claim you." Catherine's heart sank. She had known it was likely, but hearing it confirmed was still a blow. "So we are on our own." "Not quite." Kane pulled a folded paper from his pocket. "The sheriff put up a notice in town, and will send word to the surrounding settlements. If any relatives surface in the next few weeks, they will know where to find the children. In the meantime, he suggested the orphanage in Prescott." "Absolutely not." The words burst out of Catherine before she could stop them. "I will not let them go to some orphanage where they will be separated and forgotten." "What else do you propose?" Kane asked. "You cannot care for 3 children on your own with no money and no home." "I will find a way. I will get work in Vulture City. I can sew, I can cook, I can—" "You can barely survive," Kane interrupted, but not unkindly. "Catherine, I understand what you are feeling, but you have to be practical." "Practical?" Catherine felt anger rising in her chest, hot and fierce. "These children have lost everything. Everyone they loved is dead or gone, and you want me to hand them over to strangers because it is practical? I want you to think about what is best for them." "What is best for them is to be loved and protected and kept together," Catherine shot back. "What is best for them is to have someone who cares whether they live or die." They stared at each other, both breathing hard, until Kane finally looked away. "You are right," he said quietly. "I apologize. I'm not used to thinking about what anyone else needs." Catherine felt some of her anger drain away. "I'm sorry, too. I should not have snapped at you. None of this is your responsibility." "Maybe it should be." Kane met her eyes again. "I have been thinking about it all day, riding back and forth to town. I have this cabin, plenty of space, enough supplies to last through winter. I live alone because I chose to, but there's no reason I have to stay that way." Catherine's heart began to beat faster. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that you and the children can stay here, as long as you need to, or want to." He shifted his weight, looking almost uncomfortable. "It is not a perfect solution. This is a rough life, isolated and sometimes dangerous. But it is a life, and you would all be together." "You barely know us," Catherine whispered. "Why would you do this?" Kane was quiet for a long moment, looking out at the darkening mountains. "When I came back from the war, I thought I wanted to be alone. I thought solitude would heal whatever was broken inside me, but all it did was let me hide from the world. From myself." He turned back to her. "Yesterday, when I found you in that cave, ready to fight a mountain lion with a stick to protect those children, I saw something I had not seen in a long time. I saw courage. I saw love. I saw someone who gave a damn about something other than her own survival." He paused. "I want to be part of that. I want to remember what it feels like to be part of something good." Catherine felt tears spilling down her cheeks. "You saved our lives. You are already part of something good. Then stay. Stay and let me help you raise these children. Let me be part of a family again." The word family hit Catherine right in the center of her chest. She thought about the 3 children inside the cabin, already calling her mama. She thought about Kane, this rough, complicated man who had hidden himself away in the mountains, but who had still ridden out to help strangers. She thought about the alternative, dragging 3 traumatized children to a town where no one knew them, trying to find work while keeping them fed and clothed and safe. "Yes," she heard herself say. "Yes, we will stay." Kane's entire body seemed to relax, though his expression remained carefully neutral. "Good. That is good." He cleared his throat. "We should set some rules, expectations. I do not want anyone to feel uncomfortable." "Of course." Catherine wiped at her tears, trying to compose herself. "You and the children will have the loft. I will sleep down here. You will have full say over how the children are raised and what they need. I will provide and protect. Beyond that, we will figure things out as we go." "That sounds fair." Catherine hesitated, then added, Kane, I want you to know that I do not take this lightly. What you are offering us, it is more than charity. It is a chance at a real life. I will work hard to make sure you do not regret it. I know you will." He smiled then, just a small quirk of his lips beneath the beard, but it transformed his entire face. "Now, I should probably tell the children before they start worrying about what is taking us so long." They went inside together, and Kane explained the arrangement to Thomas, Sarah, and Emma. The children's reactions varied. Emma simply nodded and went back to playing with a carved wooden horse Kane had brought from town, while Thomas looked suspicious, and Sarah looked hopeful. "You are sure you want us here?" Thomas asked, his young voice trying to sound adult. "We are a lot of trouble." Kane crouched down to the boy's level, bringing his massive frame down to where he could meet Thomas's eyes. "I am sure. This cabin has been too quiet for too long. I think it could use some noise." "I am very noisy," Emma volunteered helpfully. "I noticed." Kane ruffled her hair with one large hand, and the little girl beamed. That night, after the children were asleep, Catherine and Kane sat by the fire again. It was becoming a habit, she realized, these quiet moments at the end of the day. "Thank you," she said softly, "for giving us this chance. And thank me in a month when you are sick of living in the wilderness with a mountain man," Kane replied, but there was humor in his voice. "I do not think I will be." Catherine pulled her borrowed blanket tighter around her shoulders. "Can I ask you something personal?" "You can ask. I might not answer." "Fair enough." She studied the flames for a moment, gathering her thoughts. "You said you came here after the war. Did you have family? A wife?" Kane's jaw tightened, but he answered, "I had a family once. Parents, 2 brothers. They are all gone now. One brother died in the war, the other from fever. My parents followed not long after. As for a wife, no. There was a girl I courted before the war, but when I came back, she was married to someone else, someone who had not seen the things I had seen, someone who could still smile without it hurting." Catherine's heart ached for him. "I'm sorry. It was a long time ago." He poked at the fire with an iron rod. "What about you? You said you were traveling with your aunt and uncle. What happened to your parents?" "They died when I was 16. Cholera outbreak in Illinois. My aunt and uncle took me in, but I always felt like a burden. When they decided to move west, I think they were hoping I would find a husband and settle down, free them from the responsibility of caring for me." "Their loss," Kane said gruffly. "You are not a burden to anyone." The simple declaration made Catherine's throat tight. "I hope not. I want to earn my keep here. I can cook and clean and mend. I can help with the livestock and—" "Catherine." Kane cut her off gently. "You do not need to prove your worth to me. You already did that when you kept those children alive for 2 days in hostile territory with no supplies. Anyone who can do that has more than earned their place." They fell into comfortable silence after that, and Catherine found herself watching Kane in the firelight. He was not a handsome man in the conventional sense. His features were too rough, too weathered by sun and wind. But there was something compelling about him, something that drew her eye again and again. The strength in his hands as he worked, the surprising gentleness he showed the children, the way his eyes sometimes looked out at the mountains with such longing it made her chest hurt. Over the following weeks, they settled into a routine. Catherine took over the cooking and cleaning, finding a deep satisfaction in making the cabin feel like a home. Kane taught her how to manage his supplies, how to smoke meat and preserve vegetables for the long winter ahead. The children bloomed under the stability, their nightmares becoming less frequent, their laughter more genuine. Kane proved to be surprisingly good with children. He had endless patience with Emma's constant questions and Thomas's need to prove himself. He taught Sarah how to identify edible plants and track animals through the forest. He carved toys for them in the evenings, his large hands moving with surprising delicacy over the wood. Catherine watched him with the children and felt something growing inside her chest, something warm and complicated and a little bit terrifying. She tried to tell herself it was just gratitude, just relief at finding safety after so much danger. But she knew it was more than that. She found herself noticing little things about him, the way his hair curled at his collar when it was wet, the rare smile that transformed his serious face, the rumble of his laugh when one of the children said something funny, the way he looked at her sometimes across the table, his pale eyes intense and searching. One afternoon, about a month after they had come to the cabin, Kane announced he needed to go hunting. They were running low on meat, and he wanted to stock up before the weather turned. "Can I come?" Thomas asked immediately, bouncing on his toes. "Please, I want to learn to hunt." Kane looked at Catherine, silently asking permission. She hesitated. Thomas was only 7, still so young, but the hope on the boy's face made her nod. "Only if you promise to do exactly what Kane tells you." "I promise!" Thomas was already running to get his coat. They left early the next morning, Kane carrying his rifle and Thomas practically vibrating with excitement. Catherine spent the day in the cabin with the girls, trying not to worry. She told herself Kane would keep Thomas safe, that he had survived 5 years in these mountains and knew every danger they held. But she could not quite shake the anxiety that coiled in her stomach. They returned at dusk, Thomas chattering excitedly about everything he had seen. Kane carried a deer across his shoulders, seeming unbothered by the weight, and there was something on his face that Catherine had not seen before pride. "He did well," Kane said as he set the deer down outside the barn, stayed quiet, followed instructions, kept his head when the moment came. Thomas beamed, standing a little taller. "Kane said I can come again next time." "If your mother agrees," Kane added, glancing at Catherine. The word mother made her heart skip, even though she knew he just meant her role in Thomas's life, not any actual claim. "We will see," she said, trying to sound stern but unable to hide her smile. That night, after the children were asleep, Catherine helped Kane process the deer. It was messy, bloody work, but she did not flinch from it. Kane showed her how to make clean cuts, how to separate the meat from the bone, how to set aside the pieces for different purposes. "You have a steady hand," he observed, watching her work. "My father was a butcher," Catherine said. "I helped him sometimes before he died." "You have never mentioned that before," she shrugged, focusing on her work. It did not seem relevant, but I suppose there's a lot we do not know about each other. True enough. Kane paused in his work. "Do you miss it? Your old life?" Catherine considered the question. "I miss my parents. I miss feeling like I belonged somewhere. But the life I was heading toward, becoming some frontier wife to a man I barely knew, expected to be grateful for any scrap of affection he threw my way? No, I do not miss that future." "Is that what you think would have happened?" "It is what happens to most women without family or means." She set down her knife and looked at him directly. "Out here, a woman alone is seen as a problem to be solved, usually by marrying her off to whoever will take her. I would have ended up with a husband I did not love, bearing children for a man who saw me as property, not a partner." Kane's expression was unreadable. "And now?" "Now I'm still in a precarious position," Catherine admitted, "living on the charity of a man I barely know, with no legal claim to anything. But at least I have some control over my own life. At least the children have someone who loves them." "You do not live on my charity," Kane said firmly. "You work as hard as I do, harder sometimes. This cabin is as much yours as mine now." "But it is not, is it?" Catherine did not know what made her press the issue, but suddenly it felt important. "If you decided tomorrow that you wanted us to leave, we would have no choice but to go. If something happened to you, we would have no claim to this place, no way to survive." Kane set down his own knife, giving her his full attention. "Is that what you are worried about? That I will change my mind?" "I am worried about a lot of things." Catherine wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly cold despite the warm evening. "I am worried that we are too much trouble. I'm worried that you will wake up one day and realize you liked your solitary life better. I'm worried that I am letting these children depend on you when you might not always be here." "Catherine." Kane stepped closer, and she could feel the heat radiating from his large body. "Look at me." She forced herself to meet his eyes. "I am not going anywhere," he said, his voice low and intense. "I'm not going to change my mind. And if something happens to me, I will make sure you and the children are provided for. I give you my word." "Why?" The question came out as barely more than a whisper. "Why do you care so much about us?" Kane raised one hand as if to touch her face, then seemed to think better of it and let it drop. "Because you made me care," he said simply. "Because for 5 years I lived like a ghost, just going through the motions of survival. And then you came into my life, brave and fierce and determined to protect those children no matter what it cost you. You reminded me what it means to be alive. Catherine's breath caught in her throat. Kane. I am not asking for anything, he interrupted quickly. I know our arrangement is practical, not romantic. I know you are here because you need shelter and protection, not because you have any feelings for me. I'm fine with that. I just need you to believe that I am committed to this family we are building, however you want to define it. Catherine's heart was pounding so hard she could barely hear her own thoughts over its beating. She should stay quiet, should accept his words and let the moment pass. But something reckless and brave had taken root inside her over the past weeks, and it would not be silenced. What if I do have feelings for you? She asked. Kane went very still. What? What if I have been watching you with the children and seeing how gentle you are, how patient? What if I have been noticing the way you always serve me first at dinner, and how you fixed the loose step on the ladder without saying anything because you knew I was worried about the children falling? What if I lie awake at night in the loft listening to you breathe by the fire and wishing things were different between us? The silence stretched out so long, Catherine thought she had made a terrible mistake. Then Kane said, his voice rough, How different? Different like a real family, Catherine whispered. Different like a real marriage. Different like... She did not get to finish because Kane closed the distance between them and kissed her. It was not a gentle kiss. It was 5 years of loneliness and longing and a month of living in close quarters while pretending not to notice each other. Catherine gasped against his mouth, and Kane gentled immediately, turning fierce into tender, demanding into asking. Catherine answered by rising on her toes and threading her fingers into his long hair, pulling him closer. Kane made a sound low in his throat and wrapped his arms around her waist, lifting her off her feet as easily as he lifted Emma. The world spun, and then Catherine's back was against the barn wall, and Kane was kissing her like she was air and he had been drowning. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Kane rested his forehead against hers. I have wanted to do that since the first day I saw you, he confessed, standing in that cave with a stick in your hands, ready to take on the world. I have wanted you to do that for weeks, Catherine admitted, but I did not think you saw me that way. Not see you? Kane pulled back enough to look at her, his eyes wide with disbelief. Catherine, you are all I see. You have been driving me mad, walking around in my clothes, sitting by the fire at night, being so damn beautiful and brave and perfect. I have been trying to be a gentleman, trying not to pressure you into anything, trying to remember that you are here because you need my protection, not because you want me. I do want you, Catherine said, feeling bold and terrified and alive. I want to build a real life with you. I want to raise these children together. I want to fall asleep next to you every night and wake up beside you every morning. I want all of it, Kane. I want you. Kane kissed her again, slower this time, savoring every moment. When he finally pulled away, his eyes were bright. Marry me, he said, properly. We will ride into Vulture City tomorrow and find a preacher. Make this official. Make you my wife and those children legally ours. Yes, Catherine said, laughing and crying at the same time. Yes, yes, yes. They stood there in the gathering darkness, holding each other and kissing until they heard Emma calling from the cabin, wondering where they had gone. They broke apart reluctantly, and Kane kept his arm around Catherine's waist as they walked back together. The next morning, Kane announced their plans to the children. Emma cheered and clapped her hands, not entirely understanding but picking up on the excitement. Sarah looked between them with a knowing smile, seeming older than her 9 years. Thomas frowned. Does this mean you are going to be our real father? He asked Kane. Kane crouched down to his level. If you will have me. I know I can never replace the father you lost, but I can promise to love you and protect you and teach you everything I know. I can promise to be here for you, always. Thomas studied him seriously, then nodded. I think that would be good. I like you. I like you too, son. The word son made Thomas's face light up, and Catherine felt fresh tears threatening. She blinked them back and clapped her hands together. Well then, we should all get ready. We have a wedding to attend. They rode into Vulture City together, the children on Kane's horse and Catherine on a gentle mare he kept for carrying supplies. The town was a rough collection of buildings clustered around mining operations, but there was a small church with a circuit preacher who agreed to marry them that afternoon. Catherine wore her borrowed men's clothes since her dress was beyond repair, and Kane stood beside her in his buckskin and leather. The children served as witnesses, Emma holding a bouquet of wildflowers they had picked along the trail. The ceremony was simple and brief, but when Kane slipped a plain gold band onto Catherine's finger and kissed her in front of God and the preacher, it felt more real than anything she had ever experienced. "You are mine now," Kane murmured against her lips, "and I am yours." "Forever," Catherine promised. They spent a few hours in town, buying supplies and arranging for legal papers to be drawn up adopting the children. The sheriff seemed surprised but pleased to see them, noting that he had received no inquiries about any relatives for Thomas, Sarah, or Emma. "Looks like you all found where you belong," he said, tipping his hat to Catherine. "Congratulations, Mrs. Thompson." Mrs. Thompson. Catherine turned the name over in her mind and found she liked it very much. They rode back to the cabin as the sun was setting, the children chattering excitedly about the candy Kane had bought them and the new dolls Catherine had picked out. When they arrived home, Catherine felt something settle deep in her chest. This was home now. Not just a refuge, not just a temporary solution, but truly home. That night, Kane carried their blankets up to the loft while Catherine got the children settled. She read them their favorite stories and sang lullabies until they drifted off, safe and warm and loved. Then she climbed back down to find Kane waiting for her by the fire. He held out his hand. "Ready?" Catherine took it, feeling the calluses on his palm, the strength in his fingers. "I have been ready since the moment you asked me to stay." They climbed up to the loft together, and Kane pulled her into his arms, kissing her with a tenderness that made her heart ache. He took his time undressing her, his large hands gentle on her skin, murmuring how beautiful she was, how much he wanted her, how lucky he was to have found her. Catherine learned the landscape of his body in return, tracing the muscles that had fascinated her from the first, discovering scars from battles she would never know about, feeling the way he shuddered when she touched him. They came together slowly, carefully, making promises with their bodies that they had already made with words. Afterward, Catherine lay with her head on Kane's chest, listening to his heartbeat slow, feeling his fingers trace lazy patterns on her shoulder. The children slept peacefully nearby, and outside the cabin, the Arizona wilderness stretched out under a sky full of stars. "I love you," she whispered, the words feeling both terrifying and inevitable. Kane's arms tightened around her. "I love you too. I did not think I would ever say those words again, did not think I was capable of feeling this way, but you changed everything." "We changed everything," Catherine corrected. "All 5 of us. We became a family." "A family," Kane repeated, as if testing the word. Then, with more confidence, "Yes, a family." The months that followed were not easy. Winter came early and hard to the mountains, bringing snow that blocked the trails and winds that howled around the cabin. But inside, they were warm and safe and together. Kane taught Thomas how to trap small game and ice fish. Catherine taught Sarah how to cook and sew. Emma learned her letters and her numbers, sitting on Kane's lap by the fire while he patiently pointed out each symbol. They celebrated Christmas with a tree that Kane cut down and dragged back to the cabin, decorating it with strings of popcorn and carved ornaments. Kane gave each child a gift he had made with his own hands, a sled for Thomas, a wooden doll for Emma, a jewelry box for Sarah. Catherine gave him a new shirt she had sewn, embroidered with his initials, and he had looked at her with such love it took her breath away. Spring brought new challenges and new joys. Catherine discovered she was pregnant in March, and Kane had swept her up in his arms and spun her around despite her laughing protests. The children were thrilled at the prospect of a baby brother or sister, already making plans and arguing over names. As Catherine's belly grew, Kane became even more protective, insisting she rest more and let him handle the heavier chores. She argued at first, not wanting to be treated as fragile, but she had to admit she appreciated his care. And watching him with the children, so patient and loving, made her even more excited to see him with their baby. The baby came in October, a few weeks earlier than expected, but healthy and strong. Kane delivered him with steady hands, having attended enough animal births to know what to do. When he placed their son in Catherine's arms, both of them were crying. "He has your eyes," Catherine whispered, looking at the pale blue gaze that peered up at her. "He has your courage," Kane replied, kissing her forehead. "He came into this world fighting." They named him Daniel, after Kane's brother who had died in the war. The children were fascinated by the baby, taking turns holding him under Catherine's supervision and fighting over who got to help change his diapers. Thomas, now 8, appointed himself Daniel's protector, seriously informing everyone that no one was allowed to make the baby cry. Sarah, newly 10, helped Catherine with the nighttime feedings and sang lullabies in a sweet, clear voice. Emma, almost 6, insisted on bringing Daniel flowers and pretty rocks, creating a small shrine to him in the corner of the cabin. Life settled into a new rhythm, busier and louder, but full of love. Kane expanded the cabin, adding another room for the growing family. He built furniture and toys, hunted and trapped, and provided for his family with a dedication that never wavered. Catherine managed the household, raised the children, and made sure their home was a place of warmth and safety. On Daniel's first birthday, they had a small celebration with a cake Catherine had baked and presents the older children had made. Kane gave a short speech about how much their family meant to him, how every day he thanked God for the chance encounter that had brought Catherine and the children into his life. Drukshri. 2 years ago, I was alone in these mountains, convinced that was how I would spend the rest of my days, he said, holding Daniel on one arm and Catherine's hand with the other. I thought I had nothing left to offer the world, no reason to connect with anyone else. Then Catherine came into my life, along with these 3 incredible children, and everything changed. You all gave me a reason to wake up every morning. You gave me a purpose beyond just survival. You gave me love. Catherine wiped tears from her eyes, overwhelmed by how far they had come. From that desperate day in the cave to this moment of perfect happiness seemed like a miracle. That night, after the children were asleep, Catherine and Kane stood on the porch, looking out at the stars. Daniel was strapped to Kane's chest in a sling Catherine had made, sleeping peacefully against his father's heartbeat. "Do you ever regret it?" Catherine asked, "giving up your solitary life for all this chaos?" Kane looked at her like she had lost her mind. "Regret it? Catherine, these have been the best 2 years of my life. I have a wife I adore, 4 beautiful children, and a home that actually feels like a home. How could I possibly regret any of that?" "It is just so different from what you had planned," Catherine said. "You came to these mountains to be alone, and now you are never alone." "I was not alone," Kane corrected. "I was lonely. There is a difference. Being alone was what I thought I wanted. What I needed was a family to love. I just did not realize it until you showed me." Catherine leaned into his side, and Kane wrapped his free arm around her. They stood like that for a long time, watching the moon rise over the mountains, listening to the sounds of their children sleeping inside. 2 more years passed, bringing new changes and new blessings. Thomas grew tall and strong, showing an aptitude for tracking and hunting that made Kane proud. Sarah developed a love of reading and learning, and Kane spent long evenings teaching her everything he knew about the natural world. Emma remained the heart of their family, bringing joy and laughter wherever she went. Daniel grew into a sturdy toddler with his father's build and his mother's determination. He followed Kane everywhere, copying his movements and trying to help with chores. Kane was endlessly patient with him, letting him help chop wood and feed the animals, never too busy for his son's questions. Catherine became pregnant again in the spring of her 27th year. This time the pregnancy was harder, and she spent many days resting while the children helped Kane with the household tasks. But when their daughter was born in December, healthy and squalling with indignation, it was all worth it. They named her Rose, because Catherine said she was as beautiful and perfect as a flower. Rose had dark hair like Catherine and a fierce temper that showed itself early. She kept the entire family on their toes, demanding attention and refusing to be ignored. The cabin was loud and chaotic and full of life. There were arguments and tears, skinned knees and childhood illnesses, lessons to be taught and chores to be done. But there was also laughter and love, games by the fire and stories before bed, birthdays and holidays celebrated with joy. Kane proved to be everything Catherine had hoped for and more. He was firm but fair with the children, setting boundaries while also encouraging them to explore and learn. He taught them about the land, about how to survive in the wilderness, about the importance of honesty and hard work and caring for those weaker than themselves. But he was also tender, reading bedtime stories in his rough voice, braiding Sarah's hair when Catherine's hands were full with the babies, letting Emma paint his face with berry juice during their games. He was the first one up when any of the children had nightmares, the one they ran to when they were hurt or scared. And with Catherine, he was a partner in every sense of the word. He valued her opinions, listened to her ideas, and never made a major decision without consulting her. He helped with the children and the household, never acting as if certain work was beneath him. He told her he loved her every single day, and showed it in 1,000 small ways. On their 5th wedding anniversary, Kane gave Catherine a gift he had been working on for months, a beautiful oak rocking chair, carved with flowers and vines and their initials intertwined. He had also written her a letter, laboriously penned in his rough hand, expressing everything he felt but could not always say. Catherine read it with tears streaming down her face. He wrote about how she had saved him, how she had given him a reason to rejoin the human race, how loving her and their children was the greatest privilege of his life. He promised to love her until his last breath, to protect and cherish her and their family, no matter what challenges came. "You are the best man I have ever known," Catherine told him, folding the letter carefully and tucking it against her heart. "I am so grateful every day that you found us in that cave." "I am grateful too," Kane replied, pulling her into his arms, "for all of it, every moment, every challenge, every joy. You are my everything, Catherine Thompson." As the years continued to pass, their family became woven into the fabric of the small community that grew up around Vulture City. Kane became known as someone you could trust in a crisis, and people from miles around would seek him out when they needed help, tracking missing livestock or finding lost travelers. Catherine became the person women turned to when they needed medical help or advice about raising children. Thomas grew into a fine young man, serious and capable, with Kane's strength and Catherine's heart. At 18, he met a sweet girl named Mary at a town gathering, and Kane and Catherine watched with proud tears as he courted her with the same gentleness Kane had shown to Catherine. Sarah surprised everyone by showing an aptitude for teaching, and at 16 she began helping the circuit teacher who came through the area. She had inherited Catherine's love of books and Kane's patience, making her perfect for working with children. Emma remained the light of their family, beautiful and kind, with a gift for making everyone around her smile. At 14, she was already turning heads in town, but Kane made it very clear that anyone who wanted to court his daughter would have to meet his very high standards. Daniel, at 6, was Kane's shadow, following his father everywhere and soaking up everything he could learn about the mountains and wilderness. He had the same calm competence Kane showed, even at his young age. Rose, at 4, was a whirlwind of energy and opinions, keeping everyone on their toes. She adored her big brothers and sisters and was already showing signs of Catherine's fierce protectiveness. One evening, when all the children were settled and the cabin was finally quiet, Catherine and Kane sat on their porch in the rocking chairs they now kept there. Kane had built a second one to match the first, so they could sit together and watch the sunset. "Do you remember that first night?" Catherine asked. "When you brought us here and I was so scared of you?" Kane chuckled. "You hit it well. All I saw was a brave woman ready to defend 3 children with nothing but a stick." "I was terrified," Catherine admitted, "of you, of the wilderness, of the responsibility of caring for those children. I had no idea what I was doing." "You were exactly what they needed, what I needed." Kane reached over and took her hand. "Everything I have, everything I am, started the day I found you in that cave." Catherine squeezed his fingers. "We found each other, and we built something beautiful together." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the sun paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. Inside the cabin, they could hear the soft sounds of their children settling down for the night. This was their life now, built from nothing but love and determination and faith in each other. More years passed, bringing more changes. Thomas married his Mary and brought her to live in a cabin he built with Kane's help, just down the mountain from his parents. Sarah continued teaching, becoming beloved by every child in the area. Emma blossomed into a beautiful young woman, eventually catching the eye of a good man who proved worthy of Kane's approval. Daniel grew into his teenage years, strong and capable, with his father's skill in the wilderness and his mother's compassionate heart. Rose remained fierce and independent, announcing at 8 years old that she was going to be an explorer when she grew up, much to Kane's amusement and pride. Catherine and Kane grew older together, silver threading through their hair, lines appearing around their eyes from years of smiling. But their love never faded. If anything, it grew stronger with each passing year, deepened by shared experiences and the family they had built together. On their 10th anniversary, Kane took Catherine back to the cave where he had first found her. It took some doing to find it again, as they rarely traveled that far from home anymore. But he had marked the location in his memory, and he led her there unerringly. They stood at the mouth of the cave, looking out at the Arizona wilderness that had brought them together. Catherine could barely remember the frightened young woman she had been that day, clutching 3 orphaned children and a stick, waiting for death to find them. "I think about how different our lives could have been," Kane said quietly. "If I had not decided to investigate the wagon train attack, if I had arrived an hour later, if that mountain lion had found you first." "But you did investigate," Catherine replied, "and you arrived exactly when you were supposed to. And we are here now, together, with 5 beautiful children and a life we built from nothing." Kane turned to face her, taking both her hands in his. "I want you to know that every moment with you has been a gift. Every challenge we have faced, every joy we have shared, every day I have gotten to wake up beside you, it has all been more than I ever dreamed possible." "I feel the same way," Catherine said, her voice thick with emotion. "You saved us that day in more ways than one. You gave us a home, a family, and love. You gave us everything." They kissed there in the mouth of the cave, no longer the strangers they had been a decade ago, but partners who had weathered every storm together. When they finally broke apart, both were smiling. "Ready to go home?" Kane asked. "Always," Catherine replied. They rode back to their cabin as the sun began to set, talking about their children and their dreams for the future. When they arrived home, the cabin was lit from within, warm and welcoming. They could see shadows moving behind the windows, Daniel probably helping Rose with her letters, Sarah home for a visit, the house full of life and love. Kane helped Catherine down from her horse and pulled her close, just holding her for a long moment. "Thank you," he whispered into her hair. "For what?" "For choosing to stay. For building this life with me. For loving me even when I was just a rough mountain man who barely knew how to be around people anymore." Catherine pulled back to look at him. "You were never just anything. From the moment you offered us water in that cave, I saw who you really were, a good man with a generous heart who was just waiting for the right reason to open it again." They went inside together, into the warmth and light and noise of their family. Over dinner, Daniel told them excitedly about a fox den he had found, while Rose described in elaborate detail the fort she was building in the woods. Sarah shared stories from her students, making everyone laugh. Later, after the children were in bed, Catherine and Kane climbed up to their loft. They lay together in the darkness, listening to the familiar sounds of their home settling around them. "I have been thinking," Kane said softly, "about the future, about what happens when the children are all grown and starting their own families." "What about it?" Catherine asked, snuggling closer. "I think it will be just you and me again, like it was in the beginning. Just the 2 of us, alone in this cabin." "Does that worry you?" "No." Kane pressed a kiss to the top of her head. "I'm looking forward to it. Do not get me wrong. I love our children more than life itself, but the idea of having you all to myself, of quiet mornings and peaceful evenings, of courting my wife all over again without interruptions, that sounds pretty good to me." Catherine smiled in the darkness. "That does sound nice, though knowing us we will probably end up taking in more strays, maybe some orphaned children from another wagon train attack." Kane laughed, a deep rumble in his chest. "I would not be surprised. You have never been able to turn away someone in need." "I learned that from you," Catherine pointed out. "We learned it from each other," Kane corrected. "Everything good in my life, I learned from you." They fell asleep like that, wrapped around each other, safe and warm and loved. Outside, the Arizona wilderness stretched out under the stars, wild and beautiful and full of possibility. But inside the cabin, 5 people slept peacefully, secure in the knowledge that they were home. The years continued their steady march, bringing joys and sorrows in equal measure. Catherine's hair turned silver, and Kane's beard went completely white. They weathered illnesses and accidents, droughts and harsh winters, the normal trials of life in the wilderness. But through it all, they had each other. Thomas and Mary gave them grandchildren, 3 boys who loved visiting their grandparents' cabin and learning from Kane. Sarah never married but found fulfillment in her teaching and in helping raise her nieces and nephews. Emma married her good man and moved to California, though she visited every summer with her growing family. Daniel followed in his father's footsteps, becoming a skilled tracker and guide, helping travelers navigate the dangerous mountain passes. He met a strong woman named Grace who loved the wilderness as much as he did, and they built their life in the mountains not far from Kane and Catherine. Rose grew into a fierce, independent woman who did indeed become an explorer of sorts, mapping the Arizona territory and writing detailed accounts of the land and its people. She traveled far and wide, but always came home to the cabin where she had grown up, bringing stories and adventures to share with her parents. On Catherine's 50th birthday, the entire family gathered at the cabin for a celebration. The house was full to bursting with children and grandchildren, laughter and love. Kane had built additional chairs and tables over the years to accommodate their growing family, and the cabin that had once seemed so large now felt cozy and warm with all the people crammed inside. After dinner, Kane stood and raised his glass. 50 years ago, my wife was not even born yet, he began, earning laughs. But 28 years ago, I was a lonely man living in these mountains, convinced I would die alone and forgotten. Then one day, I found a beautiful, brave woman in a cave, protecting 3 children with nothing but a stick and her own courage, and my entire life changed. Catherine felt tears pricking at her eyes as Kane continued. Catherine, you have given me everything, a family, a purpose, love beyond anything I thought possible. You took a broken man and made him whole again. You filled this cabin with light and laughter and life, and I am grateful every single day that I decided to investigate that wagon train attack all those years ago. He raised his glass higher. To my wife, the strongest, kindest, most beautiful woman I have ever known. Happy birthday, my love. Everyone cheered and raised their glasses, and Catherine stood to embrace her husband. Thank you, she whispered, for everything, for finding us, for taking us home, for loving us. Always, Kane replied, for as long as I draw breath. The celebration continued long into the night with music and dancing and stories. Catherine watched her children and grandchildren, her heart so full it felt like it might burst. This was the family she and Kane had built from nothing. These were the lives they had touched, the love they had created. Late that night, after everyone had finally settled down to sleep wherever they could find space, Catherine and Kane stood on their porch and looked out at the stars. Do you ever think about how it all started? Catherine asked. How random it was, you finding us that day? I do not think it was random, Kane replied. I think it was meant to be. Everything in my life led me to that moment, to that cave, to you. All the pain and loss and loneliness, it was all so I would be in exactly the right place at exactly the right time. That's a beautiful way to look at it, Catherine said. It is the only way to look at it. Kane pulled her close. Because I cannot imagine my life without you. Without any of this, and if I had to go through everything I went through to get here, it was worth it. They stood together in the darkness, 2 people who had found each other against all odds and built something beautiful and lasting. Behind them, the cabin was full of their family, the children and grandchildren who existed because a mountain man had once decided to investigate smoke on the horizon. As Catherine leaned into Kane's strong, steady presence, she thought about the frightened young woman she had been in that cave, certain she and the children were going to die. She could never have imagined then that she was actually at the beginning of the greatest adventure of her life, that the terrifying stranger who appeared in the cave entrance would become the love of her life and the father of her children. I love you, she told Kane, the words as true and necessary as breathing. I love you too, he replied, today, tomorrow, and forever. More years passed, as years do, bringing more changes and more blessings. Catherine and Kane grew old together, their bodies slowing but their love never fading. They watched their children flourish and their grandchildren grow. They celebrated births and mourned losses. They lived through droughts and good harvests, harsh winters and beautiful springs. On their 30th anniversary, Kane surprised Catherine by taking her back to Vulture City, to the little church where they had been married all those years ago. The town had grown considerably, but the church remained the same. I wanted to renew our vows, Kane explained, leading her inside. I wanted to stand in front of God and anyone who would listen and promise to love you all over again. So they did, with Thomas and Sarah and Daniel and Rose standing as witnesses and several grandchildren watching with curious eyes. The same preacher who had married them 3 decades earlier, now quite elderly himself, smiled as he led them through the ceremony. When Kane slipped a new ring onto Catherine's finger, this one carved from wood and inlaid with silver, she cried happy tears. "You made this?" she asked. "Spent 6 months working on it," Kane admitted. "Wanted it to be perfect for you." "It is perfect," Catherine assured him. "Just like you. Just like our life together." They kissed to the applause of their family, and Catherine thought about how far they had come, from strangers to spouses, from a mountain man and a frightened refugee to partners who had built an entire legacy together. The years continued, bringing Kane and Catherine into their 60s. They moved slower now, their joints stiff and their hair completely white, but they still sat on the porch every evening, holding hands and watching the sunset. They still kissed each other goodnight and said, "I love you," every single day. They still found joy in each other's company, in the life they had built, in the family that surrounded them. On a cool evening in October, 35 years after Kane had first found Catherine in that cave, they sat together on the porch with blankets wrapped around them. The cabin behind them was quiet, the children all grown and gone to their own homes, though they visited often. "Do you have any regrets?" Catherine asked, not for the first time over the years, and Kane gave the same answer he always did. "Not a single one, except maybe that I did not find you sooner." Catherine smiled and squeezed his hand. "We found each other exactly when we were supposed to, and we have had a beautiful life together." "The most beautiful," Kane agreed. "You know what I think about sometimes? That mountain lion that was circling your cave. If I had arrived even an hour later, it might have found you first. The timing had to be perfect." "It was perfect," Catherine said. "All of it, even the hard parts, even the scary beginning. It was all perfect because it led us here." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the stars emerge one by one in the darkening sky. After a while, Catherine said, "Tell me about the first time you saw me." Kane smiled, always willing to indulge her request for this story. "I saw a woman with torn clothes and wild hair, holding a stick like a sword, standing between 3 terrified children and whatever danger might come through that cave entrance. I thought you were the bravest thing I had ever seen, and the most beautiful." "I was filthy and exhausted," Catherine protested, but she was smiling. "You were magnificent," Kane corrected. "And when you looked at me with those fierce eyes and told me not to hurt the children, I think I fell in love with you right then. I just did not know it yet." "When did you know?" Catherine asked, even though she knew this part of the story too. "When I came back from Vulture City that first time and saw you playing with the children in the yard, the way the sunlight caught in your hair, the way you laughed when Emma said something funny, the way you looked at me when I rode up like you had been genuinely worried I might not come back. That was when I knew I wanted you to stay forever." Catherine leaned her head on his shoulder. "I knew I loved you the night you asked me to marry you. Actually, I think I knew before that. But that was when I let myself believe it might actually work, that we could build a real life together." "We did more than that," Kane said. "We built a legacy. Look at what we created together, 5 children, 12 grandchildren so far, and probably more on the way. All of them healthy and happy and loved, all of them knowing what a real family looks like." "Do you think Thomas and Sarah and Emma ever wonder what their lives would have been like if their real parents had lived?" Catherine asked. "If they had never met us?" "I do not know," Kane admitted, "but I know they have never doubted that they were loved and wanted. We gave them that, Catherine. We gave them a home and a family when they had lost everything." "We gave each other a home," Catherine said. "I was just as lost as they were that day. I just happened to be older." They continued sitting as the night deepened around them, 2 souls who had found each other in the wilderness and built something beautiful together. Eventually, Kane stood and helped Catherine to her feet. "Come on, my love. Let us go to bed." They went inside, banking the fire and checking the locks, going through the familiar evening routine they had perfected over decades. They climbed up to their loft, moving slowly but surely, and settled into the bed they had shared for 35 years. Kane pulled Catherine close, wrapping his arms around her the way he did every night. "I love you, Catherine Thompson," he said, his voice rough with age but strong with emotion. "I love you too, Kane Thompson," Catherine replied. "Thank you for finding me. Thank you for taking us home. Thank you for making us your family." "Thank you for letting me," Kane said. "Thank you for seeing past the rough mountain man to the person underneath. Thank you for giving me a reason to live again." They fell asleep like that, holding each other close, secure in the knowledge that they had lived a good life, that they had loved deeply and been loved in return, that they had made a difference in the world. The years after that passed gently. Kane's health began to fail as he entered his late 60s, his body worn out from a lifetime of hard living in the mountains. But he never complained, never lost his gentle humor or his love for his family. Catherine cared for him with the same fierce devotion she had shown from the beginning, refusing to let anyone else take over his care. On a spring morning, surrounded by his children and grandchildren, Kane Thompson passed peacefully from this world. His last words were to Catherine, a whispered "I love you," that she held close to her heart. Catherine grieved deeply, but not desperately. She had 53 years with the man she loved, had built a beautiful life with him, had seen their family flourish. She knew she was lucky to have had what they had, and she would not taint that gift with excessive sorrow. She lived another 10 years after Kane's death, surrounded by her children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren. She told them stories about their grandfather, about the mountain man who had saved her and 3 orphans in a cave, about how he had taken them home and made them his family. On a cool October evening, exactly 45 years after Kane had first found her, Catherine Cruz Thompson passed peacefully in her sleep. She was laid to rest beside Kane on a hill overlooking the cabin they had built together, with a headstone that read, "Beloved wife, mother, and grandmother. She was brave enough to love." Their children continued the legacy they had started. Thomas became a respected guide and tracker, teaching his own children the skills Kane had taught him. Sarah's students grew up to teach their own children, spreading knowledge and compassion through the territory. Emma's writings about her family's story inspired others to open their hearts to those in need. Daniel protected the mountains his parents had loved, ensuring they would remain wild and beautiful for future generations. Rose explored the world, but always remembered the lessons of love and family she had learned in that cabin. And in the decades and centuries that followed, the story of Kane and Catherine Thompson lived on. The story of a mountain man who found a woman guarding 3 orphans in a cave and took all 4 home, building a family from loss and love. The story of 2 people who found each other in the wilderness and created something beautiful and lasting that would echo through the generations. Because in the end, that was what mattered. Not the hardship or the fear or the uncertainty of those first days, but the love that grew from that chance encounter, the family that bloomed in the wilderness, the legacy of 2 people who chose each other, chose love, chose to build something good and true in a harsh and unforgiving world. Their cabin still stands today, preserved by their descendants as a reminder of where it all began. Visitors come to see it, to hear the story, to understand what is possible when 2 people decide to open their hearts despite their fears. They stand at the entrance and imagine a frightened young woman clutching 3 orphaned children and a mountain man who could have walked away but chose to help instead. And somewhere, in whatever comes after this life, Kane and Catherine Thompson are together still. Holding hands, watching sunsets, grateful for every moment they had and every life they touched. Still in love after all these years, still the family they chose to become on that fateful day when a mountain man took 4 strangers home and made them his own. The story of their love, their courage, and their family lives on as a testament to the power of choosing compassion over convenience, love over loneliness, and family over fear. It reminds us all that sometimes the most important moments in life come disguised as chance encounters, and that opening our hearts to others can transform not just their lives, but our own. In the end, that is the legacy of Kane and Catherine Thompson, and the family they built together in the wilderness of Arizona Territory. A legacy of love, courage, and the unshakable belief that family is not just about blood, but about who you choose to love and who chooses to love you back. A legacy that continues to inspire, to encourage, and to remind us all of what truly matters in this world, not wealth or status or power, but love and family and the courage to take strangers home and make them your own.